339-5778. Thanks, and I'll see you next time. Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I'd like to talk about Netflix's Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story, insights from a gay psychotherapist on healing for gay male survivors of sexual trauma. As a gay men specialist psychotherapist and ASECT, American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, certified sex therapist, I've spent 32 years working with male survivors of sexual trauma, including those who have faced incest and molestation. Netflix's Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story, is a gripping look at the sensational 1990s murder trial that shocked the world, bringing attention to issues like parental abuse, incest, and sexual assault, which continue to impact survivors today. I was there for part of the court proceedings when I was very young in LA. I thought at the time I might write a book about the whole thing because I was just beginning my training in mental health, but put that off, and others did probably a better job than I could have done about that. But I remember being in that circus of the courthouse scene and seeing the people involved in such a high profile and controversial trial. With this show on Netflix, I even found it interesting that the show reveals that Lyle wore a hair system, which I do, as does my great colleague in Detroit, Joe Court, PhD, and he's discussed using that on TikTok. So the show seems timely on all kinds of levels. While Lyle and Erik Menendez have always identified as heterosexual, issues of sexual assault for male survivors, straight and gay, and other sexual identities can overlap. So here, from my perspective as a gay men specialist, I will discuss some of both. For gay male survivors of incest and sexual abuse, the now legendary story of the Menendez brothers opens up difficult but necessary conversations about trauma, credibility, and healing, and where social ills like incest and sexual abuse meet high visibility media and the sensationalism in the American justice system, which has only increased since the days of the Menendez trials and the growth of sensationalized media and social media, especially regarding crime and politics. Let's talk about sexual abuse, trauma, and parricide. Are they connected? So cases of parricide, killing one's parents, often involve issues of abuse. I learned that during my initial research into the case as it was happening. Cases of children killing their parents are often linked to long histories of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. For gay men, these dynamics are even more complex. The shame, secrecy, and silence that can follow sexual abuse, especially when the perpetrator is a parent, leads to deep emotional scars. Gay male survivors of incest and sexual assault face additional layers of stigma. Society often marginalizes their experiences, and survivors may wrestle with identity issues, further complicated by internalized homophobia and abuse. The painful and incorrect assumption that being abused by a male perpetrator, makes you gay, is unfortunately still pervasive. This is not only untrue, but it ignores the real psychological phenomenon of repetition compulsion, where straight male survivors may seek to recreate their trauma in an unconscious attempt to somehow master it. Dr. Court has talked about this as well, about men who perform gay sex acts, but they're not really gay if they're survivors of male sexual assault. So that's where the nuance comes in, and it can be confusing, but sexual assault or incest or molestation do not change the sexual orientation. So both straight and gay male survivors need a lot of support for healing so that they can reclaim their right to happy and satisfying sexual and emotional adult relationships. So as an ASEC certified sex therapist, I help gay men overcome many kinds of challenges to fulfilling sex lives. So, can we believe the Menendez brothers' claims? One of the most controversial aspects of the Menendez case is whether we should believe Lyle and Erik's claims that they suffered years of sexual abuse by their father. Many argued this was a cynical defense strategy to justify the parasite of their wealthy parents to inherit their fortune and blame it on the mafia. But evidence suggests that the abuse may have been real. Letters written by Erik to his cousin before the murders describe the horrific acts of molestation, and this newly discovered evidence has raised fresh questions about whether their actions were in self-defense rather than driven by greed or sociopathy. In fact, recent developments indicate that this letter might even lead to a new trial, shedding light on a possible history of ongoing abuse that had been minimized in the original trial. For survivors like Lyle and Erik, the trauma of sexual abuse and the pressures of a super competitive, appearance driven culture like Los Angeles and Hollywood could have contributed to their mental distress. Class and appearance privilege played a role too, being the sons of a wealthy, powerful television entertainment executive may have silenced their cries for help. The brothers' testimony, the graphic nature of the allegations, and the emotional responses they displayed during the trial mirror those of many abuse survivors. Others might point to the crocodile tears during the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse as a manipulative ploy for sympathy to a jury. And in the Rittenhouse case, it worked. He was acquitted, while Lyle and Erik were not. With the presence of a legal murder case trial, the justice system part of the story and the emotional reality part of the story get conflated. Does being a victim of severe abuse justify murder? The legal system treats these ideas in complex ways, differentiating manslaughter from premeditated murder, or crimes of passion, or even temporary insanity, which is a legal term but not a mental health term. This dichotomy, victim or villain, often plays out in the media when male survivors come forward, particularly when the perpetrators are parents. Society tends to struggle with holding both ideas at once, that someone can be deeply wounded by trauma and still capable of terrible actions. In the years since their conviction, both Lyle and Erik have been heterosexually married while in prison. Lyle Menendez married Rebecca Sneed, a former magazine editor, in 2003. They had known each other for years before getting married while he was in prison. And Erik Menendez married Tamma Sackelman in 1999. Tammy has been a vocal supporter of Erik throughout his time in prison, and she's even written a book about their relationship titled They Said We'd Never Make It. Lyle and Erik Menendez marriages to Rebecca Sneed and Tammy Sackelman have sparked significant public interest, particularly in relation to the psychological phenomenon where some individuals are attracted to people convicted of violent crimes. Charles Manson had this experience in prison. And this fascination is often linked to a condition known as hybristophilia, sometimes referred to as bad boy or criminal lover fetish. Hybristophilia involves sexual attraction to people who have committed crimes, especially those considered heinous or violent. And these can be of all genders and sexual orientations. So what are some of the reasons behind marrying a convicted murderer? Well, one of them could be notoriety and power. Some women, and I think some men, gay men, may be attracted to the power and notoriety surrounding infamous criminals like the Menendez brothers, or the other murderer, I can't think of his name, but in Los Angeles. The bad boy allure combined with their high profile case can create a fascination with the danger and mystery associated with their violent past. It can also be about control and fantasy. In the case of Erik and Tammy Sackelman, she has said that being with someone in prison allows for a controlled form of intimacy. Since the relationship is heavily restricted, like no conjugal visits, for instance, it creates a fantasy space where the relationship is idealized without the pressures of everyday life. Richard Ramirez, that's the name I couldn't think of. but he had was either married or had, lots of love letters in prison. Oh, a belief in innocence. Tammy Sackerman, Erik's wife, has publicly expressed her belief in his innocence, or at least her belief that the abuse they endured justifies their actions. And this could contribute to her decision to marry him, as she may see him as a victim rather than a perpetrator. So while hybristophilia can explain some aspects of these relationships, it's important to note that both women have stated that their relationships are based on love, support, and mutual understanding, rather than a mere attraction to the brother's crimes. For some, these marriages may be seen as part of a larger psychological pattern, but the individuals involved often express their relationship in terms of emotional connection and loyalty. So in a way, we could say that their marriages are like a non-traditional relationship, which even that term non-traditional is problematic because it assumes that there's a tradition that people should be following, like heterosexuality. But in a way, we could say that their marriages are a type of stigmatized societal relationship, just like gay and lesbian relationships can be. So let's talk about class privilege and abuse. The Menendez brothers versus average survivors. The Menendez brothers had the wealth and privilege and high-profile upbringing in Beverly Hills that most survivors don't share. The resources they had allowed them access to luxury items, but also made them targets for those who expected them to live up to their father's legacy. For more average survivors, especially gay men, life often doesn't include wealth or fame, but the emotional and psychological wounds of sexual abuse are no less profound. We struggle here in the United States with tiers of care, throughout the medical system and certainly in the mental health system. Advocacy for mental health involves emphasizing that everyone is equally deserving of help for the trauma they have endured. And the fight for access to care is ongoing socially, politically, and legally. Let's talk about the role of the Menendez brothers' therapist, Dr. Jerome Oziel. In the Menendez brothers' trial, their therapist, Dr. Jerome Oziel, played a highly controversial role. Oziel's ethical violations undermined the public's trust in the therapeutic process and highlighted the critical importance of therapist confidentiality, all guided by the HIPAA confidentiality laws. What Oziel did was he secretly recorded sessions with Lyle and Erik in which the brothers reportedly confessed to killing their parents. But these recordings weren't handled with the utmost care. Oziel shared them with his mistress, allegedly Judalyn Smith, who later used the information to expose the brothers to the Beverly Hills Police Department. And Dr. Oziel's actions violated fundamental principles of client confidentiality under California law and the ethical standards of the American Psychological Association and other governing bodies like the California Board of Behavioral Sciences. His decision to secretly record therapy sessions without the explicit consent of his clients was not only unethical but illegal. Under California law, it is illegal to record confidential conversations without the consent of all parties involved, and that's a violation that undermines the trust between therapist and client. Oziel failed to safeguard these sensitive recordings by allowing them to fall into the hands of his mistress, which compromised the integrity of his practice and harmed his clients. So things like tapes or record keeping need to be kept under lock and key. All of my records are either secured online, secured with password protected and encrypted, and my old paper files before I went to the paperless office are secured with great pains in order to protect them from falling into the wrong hands. The fact that Oziel shared the privileged information with a third party breached the most sacred aspect of therapy, the confidentiality that allows clients to be vulnerable with their innermost feelings and their true selves without fear of exposure. The APA's ethics code explicitly requires therapists to maintain the privacy of their clients unless there is a clear imminent risk of harm to the client or others. So it's kept confidential if your client confesses to a crime. But if they announce planning a crime, like, I don't like my rent, I'm going to go home and kill my landlord, okay, then we have to act, because it wouldn't be right to allow a murder to take place. But that's really the only exception. The other exceptions include things like a legal proceeding where something might be brought to light by court order, or a police investigation under certain circumstances, although confidentiality would still apply in that. And certainly in cases of elder or child abuse, then also there would be a duty to protect victims of a client's theoretical actions. So the Menendez case serves as a cautionary tale of how one's therapist's conduct can shake confidence in psychotherapy in general. But it's important to understand that Dr. Zeal's behavior is not representative of the profession as a whole. And clients should not be deterred from seeking therapy because of this isolated case. My own practice is built on a foundation of strict adherence to professional ethics, including maintaining client confidentiality and safeguarding any information that's disclosed during sessions. Even the Zoom sessions are encrypted and protected from that kind of thing. Practicing in Los Angeles, the land of Hollywood, this is further nuanced by working with some high-profile people in the public eye. Where's Dr. Aziel now? Well, following his involvement in the Menendez case, Dr. Aziel faced professional and legal consequences for the ethical breaches. He was eventually stripped of his license to practice as a psychologist in California, and he remains a highly discussed figure in legal and psychological ethics circles. So he remains a powerful example of how therapists have to adhere to strict ethical guidelines. He's still alive, but losing his psychology license in 1997, he's no longer practicing as a therapist, but resides in another state where he works in marital mediation, helping couples improve their relationships through mediation, serving as an alternative to divorce. His involvement in the Menendez case, continues to draw this attention, especially when it's dramatized in things like the Netflix show and other types of media adaptations. But he's understandably distanced himself from the public commentary on these dramatizations. Judelon Smith, who played a key role in the trial, has since moved away from the public spotlight to another state, and she received significant public backlash, which led her to seek a more private existence as a now retired emergency medical technician. Even Lyle and Erik, who are now in the same prison near San Diego after having been separated for a number of years in different prisons, where they're serving sentences without possibility of parole, have conducted classes and their prison work, including activities to support sexual abuse survivors. So I find it interesting that these various figures involved in the trial are all involved in activities that somehow support people. Though Smith and defense attorney Leslie Abramson are now retired and out of the limelight. It's worth noting, can there be something good that comes out of tragedy? Can we seek that? Can we find the good that comes from tragedy and say, what can we learn from this? How can we make meaning of trauma? Making meaning of trauma is one aspect of healing. Let's switch now and talk about how gay male survivors differ from straight male survivors. So gay male survivors of sexual abuse often face unique challenges compared to straight ones. Society imposes harmful myths, such as the fallacy that boys who are sexually abused by male perpetrators will turn gay. Recently, vehement and acridly aggressive attempts by Republican politicians or caustic conservative media personalities jockeying for, fame and fortune and notoriety and attention that comes in the social media age have propagated this myth, along with the dangerous, hateful myth that drag queens groom children for abuse or try to cause them to be gay, or that teachers teaching or even mentioning the reality of the diversity of the American family will also cause students to be gay or trans, or teaching about the LGBTQ plus history. All of this isn't true. Sexual orientation is innate, and abuse does not determine one's sexual identity. However, both gay and straight survivors might struggle with that repetition compulsion, where they may reenact aspects of their trauma in their adult activities, probably all unconsciously, seeking out abusive or exploitive experiences in this complex, unconscious attempt to make sense or regain control of what happened to them. But even straight male survivors doing this does not mean they're gay, and these nuances can be difficult for bigots to understand, most of all because they don't want to understand. They don't want to do the work of understanding about things like the difference between sexual orientation and repetition compulsion. So this difference between this and genuine sexual orientation needs to be addressed compassionately in therapy for both gay and straight survivors, helping them to reclaim their right to an adult sexuality free of the influence of past abuse. By the way, there's a figure on Instagram, Kristen Browdy, who's a trans woman in Miami, who did a project analyzing the data of who is being arrested for sexual crimes against children. It's the website whoismakingnews.com. And she gathered the data of what the demographics are of the people arrested or convicted of sexual crimes against children. And, there were thousands or tens of thousands. I think only one of them was a drag queen. So, that blows that theory. Most of them actually were cops or religious clergy or Republican politicians, the majority. But she outlined all of that data, and I think it makes a very important point to discuss the myth versus the reality of who the perpetrators are in the United States and the unfair stigma that gay men or drag queens get, which is a product of homophobia. It's not, the actual demographics of who are committing these crimes. So additionally, gay male survivors might carry an internalized homophobia or a self-loathing stemming from their abuse, or a guilt, like, what if I enjoyed it? Particularly if their abuser was male. For survivors, even if they enjoyed a pleasurable stimulation or the positive attention from the perpetrator, it's the power imbalance and the violation of their fundamental rights by a perpetrator that's the problem. In a more complex case, where the perpetrator is female or the co-perpetrator, such as in the case of the Menendez brothers' mother, she allegedly kept quiet for the sake of the family. But this can also happen for women who are victims of patriarchy and toxic masculinity, and they're afraid to speak up, including fear for their lives from violent men. So for all survivors, breaking the cycle of shame and learning to experience consensual, affirming, satisfying, fun sexual and emotional relationships can be a key part of the healing process. Let's talk about how therapy helps gay male survivors of sexual abuse. If you're a gay male survivor of sexual abuse, incest, or molestation, the first thing to realize is that you're not alone in that. It can feel isolating, but you're not alone in that experience. And therapy can indeed help you reclaim your life. Trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the most effective approaches to help survivors process their abuse and reduce feelings of shame and self-blame and begin the journey toward healing. In therapy, we work to address the intrusive thoughts and depression or anxiety that sexual trauma often brings, helping survivors develop healthier emotional responses and a stronger sense of self-esteem and self-worth and an appreciation and self-love. Therapy also provides a safe space to explore the complicated emotions, the varied emotions that survivors may feel even toward their abusers. In cases of parental abuse, these emotions may include love and hate and fear and shame and sometimes admiration of who these people were. Lyle and Erik had this admiration for their father at the same time that they detested him, being very conflicted. And this is, I think, very well portrayed in the drama, and certainly well written and well acted and well directed about these emotional nuances. Even though the dialogue of the script is speculative, we have a pretty good idea that this is how these guys actually felt. In therapy, we work through all the different emotions together so that you can move forward without this feeling that you're being held captive by your past. Even in telehealth sessions, I've seen tremendous progress with survivors who are ready to take the courageous step toward healing. In-person therapy offers its own strengths, but studies show that virtual therapy, like I do, can be just as effective in helping you reach your emotional health goals. Therapy or trauma therapy offers survivors the opportunity to reclaim their lives. I use that word a lot. It's an empowered, a self-empowered, determined, almost defiant idea, reclaiming your life to reduce symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and move toward all kinds of personal goals. So trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy can help survivors reframe negative thoughts and develop healthier coping mechanisms in the wake of their abuse. In my practice, I've seen firsthand how these therapies empower survivors to thrive even after enduring horrific abuse. It's the idea that your life from here forward can be much better than what it was in the past. No matter where you came from, you're still just as entitled to a brighter future as much as anybody else, including people who were never abused in the first place. But the decision to seek help for male survivors in general and gay male survivors in particular can have its own challenges. Certainly there can be access to treatment issues, such as, are there available qualified providers of psychotherapy or possibly life coaching who are both qualified to help specifically male, especially gay male survivors with the appropriate cultural competency to help gay men. Not all providers have adequate training for this because men's psychology, in general is different from women's psychology. And the psychology of trans people, masculine or feminine, is different yet again. And everyone has a right to have help be accessible, whether it's in your local area or via telehealth. Unfortunately for providers managing a commercial private practice, cost can be an issue. Just like with medical or dental or vision or chiropractic or physical therapy, all forms of healthcare, especially in the United States, but also worldwide. Politically, legally, and socially, we need much more advocacy for access to care. Specialized providers like me, those who are senior in the field with decades of experience, tend to have higher fees. But even newcomers who live in high cost of living cities can have similar fees. So politically, electing politicians who support public funding for mental health and social services is always important in every locale, particularly as we look in the United States currently at the fall 2024 election season. Look where your candidates stand on things like access to mental health services, because not all of them do. So other barriers to receiving help are more psychological in nature, such as, number one, shame and stigma. Many male survivors of abuse experience feelings of shame or embarrassment, which can make them hesitant to seek therapy. Societal expectations about masculinity can often lead to internalized shame, where you might believe that needing help is a sign of weakness. So what can you do about it? It's important to understand that seeking therapy is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of courage and self-empowerment and determination and volition and will. So start by acknowledging that healing emotional wounds is just as necessary as healing physical ones. Like you fall down and break your leg and get a cast. It's kind of the same idea. You don't have to face this alone. and talking about your experiences can reduce the power of shame over time. That's how psychotherapy began. Sigmund Freud called psychotherapy the talking cure. There's something about talking about the issues that can really help. Other types of expression, especially in trauma, can also be helpful, like art therapy or music therapy. It's just the idea of expressing, getting your feelings up and out of yourself. So many others, have taken the step and benefited greatly, and so can you. There's nothing wrong with you that you can't grow and heal just like others who've done the same. Number two can be a fear of vulnerability. You might feel that opening up in therapy means exposing your most personal, painful experiences, something that can feel frightening or overwhelming, especially if you've been taught to stay strong or keep emotions in check. And especially if the material is very sensitive, talking about what happened to you. The Netflix show has depicted that through scenes where the boys talk about specifically how they were abused. It's very difficult for them to get the words out because they're remembering and coping with the emotions all at the same time. So what you can do about this is break it down into pieces. You don't have to open up about everything all at once. In fact, it's better if you don't dive too far in. It can be overwhelming. Therapy is a process that unfolds at your own pace. Give yourself permission to take small steps toward vulnerability. You can share what you're comfortable with, and as trust builds, so will your ability to open up. Remember, it's the paradox that vulnerability is a strength, and in therapy, that's the path toward healing, is coming to terms and making sense and making meaning of what happened to you little by little. Number three is doubt and the effectiveness of therapy. What the hell is this? It's normal to wonder if therapy can really help, especially if you've tried to work things through on your own, or especially if you've tried therapy and it hasn't been effective in the past. Many guys I work with, especially gay men who've had straight and or female therapists in the past, complain to me that their previous providers don't get it, on either male survivor issues or gay sexual issues or gay cultural issues or whatever. This is especially true involving complex sexual issues, like survivors who have a kink or a BDSM interest, which all too often can just be written off and dismissed as an extension of their trauma, which it's not. There's an entire school of thought about how kink play can actually be healing for people who've been sexually victimized. It sounds crazy, but there's research on this, and there's clinicians who've done a lot of work on this, and the people who've done it have remarked how it's surprisingly helpful, even though it's kind of counterintuitive as a therapy practice. You wouldn't think it would be helpful, but there's examples where it can be. So the components of being specifically gay male affirmative and even kink affirmative and certainly sex positive in therapy, all of that is crucial. So what can you do? Educating yourself about how therapy works can help overcome this doubt. Different approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, psychodynamic therapy, EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, somatic experiencing, existential therapy, a model called seeking safety, prolonged exposure therapy. All of these are evidence-based and have been shown to help many individuals. Trying out therapy with an open mind and giving it time to work is key. Many people experience relief gradually over time. And I think the improvement and the healing really starts on the first session when you feel like you just have a safe place to bring your feelings and experiences to. So let's talk a little bit about the controversy surrounding EMDR and other therapy models. So you might have heard of eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, a therapy often recommended for trauma. And while EMDR is evidence-based and has been helpful for many, it's also controversial, particularly regarding the eye movement component. Some research suggests that it's not the eye movements, but the cognitive processes involved that are the most helpful, which raises questions about whether it's more science or pseudoscience to add the component of moving your eyes back and forth with lights or objects. So, despite this, other therapy models are equally, if not more effective, and they don't rely on controversial techniques. So, these include cognitive behavioral therapy, which is widely researched as effective, that helps you change unhelpful thinking patterns and behaviors and beliefs and questions. Where did these negative beliefs about yourself come from, and how can we moderate those to be less self-destructive? CBT is considered one of the most effective therapies for a range of mental health conditions, and it's one I use the most. Trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy is specifically designed for trauma survivors, and this model integrates trauma-sensitive interventions with cognitive behavioral techniques. Psychodynamic therapy focuses on understanding and resolving deep-seated emotional conflicts, often related to early life experiences and the emotional effects of experiences with how you were raised and dynamics in your family of origin. And it can help you gain insight into the root causes of your emotional pain. So cognitive behavioral therapy ranks as one of the most successful therapy models across a range of mental health conditions, including trauma. And it's very structured and it's evidence-based. What evidence-based means is that it's been shown in formal research to be effective in reducing symptoms or increasing functioning. It's not just, taking a wild guess or, kind of a snake oil. Evidence-based means formal research has backed it up as being legitimate for maybe not everyone, but a lot of people, enough that things like health insurance would reimburse for it. Health insurance doesn't reimburse for techniques that are not evidence-based, like sex addiction treatment or porn addiction treatment or other kinds of fringe practices. So by exploring different therapy options and just choosing the one that feels right for you, you can take an empowered step toward healing. Research consistently shows, therapy is crucial for survivors of incest and sexual abuse. Those who've engaged in trauma-focused therapies are more likely to experience reduced symptoms and better self-esteem, better relationships, and a better quality of life, making you more available to yourself, first of all, but also to make you more emotionally available to things like partners or spouses or even children and others, because your emotional self has been healed and it can help you relate to others better. So I've written before on gay male incest and trauma survivors, and you can find more of those articles at gaytherapyla.com/blog. There have been other podcast episodes about that as well, and it's a topic that we need to come back to because it's such a pervasive problem in our society. And we start with the belief that survivors deserve to be believed and supported and guided toward a life where they can heal and thrive. And I think this is true even with the Menendez case. It's so easy to say, oh, they just made all that stuff up because they don't want to take responsibility for being, shotgun murderers. That's true. They did, try to apply that with their legal defense, and that legal defense has been known to, get people completely acquitted. Now, I don't think those guys would be completely acquitted, but I think it is important to believe all survivors, including notorious ones like the Menendez brothers, and to really try to understand what happened to them. And again, it didn't justify the brutal murders, but it does help you understand that what kind of emotional experience would drive someone to do that. It's got to be something, because it was just so severe in the retaliation and the emotional state of being in a panic about the situation they were in. They claimed that they were literally fearing for their lives, that their parents were going to somehow murder them to shut them up for appearance's sake. So anyway, if you're a gay male survivor of sexual abuse, reach out. Therapy can help you find hope and healing and a way forward. And you don't have to navigate all this alone. This experience can be so isolating, but there is help and there is hope. Let's talk for a minute about life coaching for gay male survivors. So, in addition to therapy, life coaching can offer survivors a structured way to rebuild your life, setting goals that support your well-being. So I provide separate professional programs in helping gay men in coaching, executive coaching, relationship, career coaching. And this can help you regain a sense of control on very practical issues in life, actionable goals like relationship and dating skills, sexual skills, enhancing your career path, dealing with your finances and your financial goals, or developing personal projects that can give someone a renewed sense of purpose, either a young person or a person at midlife, or also seniors. I've worked with seniors on a renewed sense of purpose through coaching. So both therapy and coaching services are informed from the very specific sex education material I received by being an ASEX certified sex therapist, which is a 18-month training program which has the sexual and relational education that most master's or doctoral level psychotherapists just don't receive. Therapists in general receive an alarmingly small amount of education about human sexuality, and even less so about gay sex. That is a really underserved area. I had a friend tell me, a doctor that I collaborate with sometimes, you can't retire because there's just not enough gay male therapists and gay male sex therapists, but I'm going to have to retire someday, so we're going to have to cultivate resources because I can't see everybody. But, there really is a dearth of gay male ASEX certified sex therapists. There's some, it's getting better, but certainly gay men are an underserved population when it comes to sex therapy specifically. So the efforts that an abuse survivor makes by availing themselves of a variety of supportive resources help you to not only recover from your past, but also to thrive in all kinds of areas: self-esteem, self-concept, a sexually satisfying sex life, emotional relationships. When one partner is a survivor and the other is not, that can be a common issue when I do couples therapy or relationship coaching. There's actually a relationship between sexual abuse and other trauma abuse survivors and their earning power. People who've experienced shame and isolation from being an abuse survivor actually can have diminished earnings. And it's a weird, connection, but there's definitely a connection there. Same thing with career success. Abuse survivors can have a diminished sense of accomplishment in their career. They might be a teacher but not a professor. They might be a nurse but not a physician. They might be a lower level employee, but they might not be the director of the whole department because of how abuse monkeys with your self-esteem and self-concept. They can also have lesser general health because they're not taking care of themselves as much, because they don't see themselves as worthy of taking care of themselves the way a non-survivor might. So again, this idea of reclaiming is always important. Reclaiming happiness, reclaiming wholeness, reclaiming emotional health, but sexual health, and in your career as well, and your adult friendships. So many survivors can feel trapped in cycles of self-blame or anger or compulsive behaviors that mirror their trauma, and therapy can help break those cycles, helping you to identify what behaviors and what thoughts are really not working, and saying, okay, can we replace those thoughts and their behaviors with something that's more affirmative, that contributes to healing and a more profound self-acceptance in order to build your future. and this idea that you don't have to carry your burden alone, especially in isolation and secrecy. I help gay male clients overcome complications to your sex life that can occur. So, survivors who endured forced oral copulation, for example, might have a sensitive gag reflex, and performing fellatio in their adult consensual sexual life might trigger an intrusive memory very bodily. Similarly, survivors who endure forced penetration might have an aversion to being penetrated anally, even though they might desire to be a bottom for their sex partners. Being touched on certain parts of their body or how they touch their partners can trigger intrusive reactions. Different aspects of the senses, what sight, smell, touch, taste, and hearing, can be related to triggers. So, sex therapy to reclaim your sex life and heal triggers that remind one of the abuse can be enormously helpful and self-empowering as an adult, consensual sexual being. Utilizing the 6 principles of sexual health from Doug Braun Harvey and Michael Bigorito that I have adapted in the past to more specifically address their application to gay men. There's a prior episode on the 6 principles of sexual health as applied to gay men. Survivors form a community of people in our world who have being survivors of sexual trauma in common. Unfortunately, I believe the number of sexual abuse and molestation and sexual assault survivors is larger, much larger than the general public believes. It's that if you know phenomenon. Survivors need support not only for their emotional and mental health, but also for their overall functioning, like I said, in their, even in things like their work. Healing helps a survivor overcome the diminished broad quality of life issues that can come from enduring sexual crimes, and it helps to avoid maladaptive coping strategies such as violence and revenge. Our system failed the Menendez brothers because despite their ability to afford therapy in that family, the therapy they had didn't address the family crisis and made the brothers erroneously feel that murderous retaliation was their only option for escape, especially since they were not at that time minors. They were already legal adults who could have theoretically just walked away, but psychologically they couldn't, much like domestic violence survivors. If it takes a high-profile true crime case like this one and the various media depictions of it through different movies and documentaries and articles and all that, including this latest offering from Netflix in Monster, to bring awareness, maybe that will help address this gravely serious problem in society. I think the creator, Ryan Murphy, probably tries through the Monster series to help bring up not only the story of what's happened, but also to help us to understand why. Who are these people who commit these monstrous crimes? I think there's a funny little nuance in the title in Monster, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story. Who's the monster? Was it Jose and Kitty who allegedly abused the boys, or was it the boys for blowing their parents' head off? Exactly who are the monsters in this story? Was it the justice system? Was it the therapist doing unethical things? Was it the therapist's mistress doing unethical things to expose them? Was it, other people that formed the system and the context that this crime happened in? So I hope that the show, like a lot of other entertainment shows, helps foster discussions that might help let survivors know that help is available in many different forms and from many different kinds of providers. Even though my area, my profession, is just more specifically for the gay male survivors, but people of all gender identities and sexual orientations and other demographics all deserve very specialized help to heal. So if you're ready to take your next step toward healing, I encourage you to reach out. Together, we can begin the journey toward, again, reclaiming your life, free from the weight of your past. I invite you to contact me at ken@gaytherapyla.com, ken@gaytherapyla.com. Gaytherapyla.com is the therapy website. Gay Coaching LA is the coaching website. And you can text or call me for both at 310-339-5778. 310-339-5778. You can visit other articles at gaytherapyla.com/blog, or other episodes also that interest you, not only about gay male sexual abuse and trauma survivors, but other issues. The whole show is about gay men's mental health and well-being as individuals and couples and polycules. Together we can work through the pain of the past and help you rebuild your life. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.